My name is Debbie C. Boggs, and I am 30 years old. By the time I walked into that dinner, I already had that familiar, careful smile on my face, the one I learned to wear in my family when I needed to look calm while something inside me braced for impact. I didn't expect the impact to come as cleanly as it did, though. I thought the night would be simple, a celebration, a surprise, a rare moment where I could give something big without it turning into a lesson about my place in the room. I'd use my bonus to buy my brother a trip to Japan. First class, 2 seats, paid in full. I'd planned it weeks ago, quietly, deliberately, because I wanted it to feel magical, like something that could reset the story we'd been stuck in our whole lives. My brother had been obsessed with Japan when we were kids. He talked about Tokyo like it was a promise. Food, culture, neon streets, temples, the whole dream. I told my mom about the tickets because I thought she'd help me make it a real surprise. I thought she'd be proud of me for doing something generous. I thought she'd protect the moment. That was my mistake. The dinner table was crowded with the usual cast. My dad at one end, silent but present, letting my mom do what she always did, control the temperature of the room. An uncle who laughed too loudly. A few relatives who clapped on command. My brother sitting like he belonged at the center of it all, his girlfriend beside him. Already glowing with anticipation because my mom had been acting strange all week in that way she does when she's planning something. My boyfriend Ethan had offered to come with me, but my mother had insisted it was family only, which I accepted the way I always did, like my comfort was a negotiable item. My mother waited until the first plates were served to do it. She didn't rush. She didn't stumble. She made a little show of smoothing her napkin, of looking around the table like she was about to announce a blessing. Then she slid a crisp white envelope across the table toward my brother with a smile that made my stomach tighten before I even understood why. "You're only here because I felt sorry for you," she said. Not to him, but about me, like I wasn't sitting 3 feet away, like I was part of the decor. The words landed, and the table reacted the way it always did when my mother spoke with confidence. A pause, then laughter, then that soft wave of applause people do when they don't want to think too hard about what they're clapping for. My dad lifted his glass. My uncle slapped my brother's back. My brother opened the envelope slowly, already grinning, like he knew what was inside because my mother had probably been feeding him hints, letting him believe the moment belonged to her. When he pulled out the tickets, his girlfriend gasped like she was in a movie. First class to Japan, the exact thing I had bought, the exact thing I had paid for. My bonus turned into her performance. My mother sat there soaking it in like a standing ovation, like she'd just done something selfless and grand. And I sat there smiling. Not because I was happy, not because I was proud, but because sometimes the only thing you can do when you're being made the punchline is keep your face still, so you don't give them the satisfaction of watching you break. I watched my brother start talking immediately about hotels. Not the boutique place I'd picked near Shinjuku because he said he wanted something authentic, something with character. No, he was talking about 5-star luxury, rooftop pools, the kind of places he couldn't afford on his own, and never would have booked without someone else's money behind it. He talked like the trip had always been inevitable, like the universe had finally delivered what he deserved. My mother didn't correct him. She didn't mention my name. She didn't even glance at me to see if I was okay. The omission wasn't accidental, it was a choice. It was her favorite kind of power, the kind that lets her erase someone and still make them sit politely through it. The rest of dinner blurred, bland chicken, dry rice, a store-bought cake that tasted like sugar and cardboard. I remember the girlfriend pulling up pictures of her Tokyo vision board, giggling about outfits and photos. I remember relatives telling my mother how generous she was. I remember my brother basking in it, the golden child receiving a gift he didn't earn and didn't even think to question. And I remember the exact moment I stopped feeling surprised. Because this wasn't new. This was just louder than usual. My whole life, my mother had treated my contributions like they didn't count unless she could claim them. If I paid for something, it was family money. If I helped, it was what you're supposed to do. If my brother succeeded, it was because she raised him right. If I succeeded, it was because I got lucky. If I suffered, it was because I was too sensitive. I didn't speak. I didn't confront her at the table. I didn't demand credit or ask why she said what she said. I just kept smiling and waited for the moment I could leave without making it a scene, because scenes are what my mother feeds on. She starves without an audience. When the plates were cleared, I stood up calmly, wiped my mouth with my napkin, and said I had an early morning. No one stopped me. My mother didn't say goodnight. My brother barely looked up. They were too busy celebrating a story where I didn't exist. I walked out into this night air and felt something in me shift from hurt to clarity. Not rage, not heartbreak, just a cold, clean understanding that if I stayed in this family the way I had been staying, I would keep getting erased. At home, I poured a glass of wine and opened my laptop like I was clocking in for a job. I logged into the airline account. The booking was in my name, not my mother's, not my brother's. The miles transfer was attached to my rewards account. The payment was traceable to my card. This wasn't a gift she could actually own, no matter how loudly she presented it. I canceled the tickets. 2 clicks, a confirmation screen. A refund process initiated. Then I reversed the miles transfer. The points slid back into my account like they'd never left. Then I logged into the hotel site and canceled the reservation. And after that I called the front desk directly, polite and steady, telling them to expect a no-show and not to hold the room. The woman on the phone thanked me like this was normal. To her, it was. To me, it was a line being drawn. Last, I froze the emergency account my family used whenever their own bank balance ran dry. The one my mother called just in case, but somehow always became right now. I froze it the way you shut off water to a pipe that's been leaking for years. When I finished, I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel guilty. I felt calm, like the last domino in a long row had finally tipped, and everything that was going to fall had already started falling. The next morning, they would go to the airport expecting a celebration. They would discover they had nothing. And for the first time in a long time, it wouldn't be my job to fix it. I woke up the next morning before my alarm, not because I was anxious, but because my body is used to waking up when there's a storm coming. The apartment was still dark, the kind of quiet that makes every small sound feel amplified. I made coffee and sat by the window, watching the street like I was waiting for something to appear out of the fog. My phone was face down on the table. For once, I didn't feel the urge to check it. I already knew what would happen. Not in the dramatic, cinematic way people imagine revenge, but in the simple, mechanical way consequences work when you remove the thing holding everything together. The first call came at 7:18 a.m. My brother. I let it ring. Another call, 7:19. His girlfriend at 7:20. I could picture her at the airport in a travel outfit she'd planned for photos, hair done, makeup perfect, clutching a passport like it was a ticket into a better life. At 7:23, my mother. I didn't answer. At 7:27, my father, which almost made me laugh because he never called unless something was on fire and he didn't know how to put it out. By 8:22 a.m., I knew they'd reached the counter because the messages started coming in. Not just missed calls, but texts that read like panic turning into rage in real time. Debbie, answer. This isn't funny. We're at the airport. What did you do? Call me right now. Then, the one that told me exactly how they saw me, even while they were desperate. Fix it. No, please. No question. Just a command, like my role had been restored the moment they needed it. I kept sipping my coffee. I wasn't imagining their faces at TSA. I wasn't gloating. I was just letting the truth play out. The tickets were void because my name had been on the booking. Not my mother's. Not my brother's. There was no backup credit card attached. No extra miles sitting there ready to cover the gap. No cash big enough to replace first-class seats at the last minute. They would have stood at that counter, cycling through the stages of disbelief, confusion, anger, and finally the kind of quiet that comes when you realize you've been depending on something you didn't actually control. Then the hotel. I knew my mother would call, still confident, still believing her authority could bully reality into compliance. But the hotel wouldn't hold a room for a reservation that didn't exist. They would say it politely. They would offer condolences with professional neutrality. They would end the call with a cheerful goodbye that felt like a door closing. By noon, they would be back home. And that was the part that surprised me. Not that they failed, but that they didn't immediately explode the way I expected. There were no voicemails dripping with rage, no furious texts threatening to disown me, just a strange gap, a sudden radio silence that almost felt unnatural. If I hadn't grown up with my mother, I might have mistaken it for reflection. But I knew better. My mother doesn't reflect. She recalculates. Silence with her isn't peace, it's strategy. It's waiting for the guilt to do the work for her. So I slept in the next day. I made pancakes. I posted a photo on Instagram with a sarcastic caption about self-care Sundays, not because I needed attention, but because I knew my brother would see it. He followed me on everything. He'd never unfollow, because that would make his anger visible, and in our family, appearance is everything. At 4:03 p.m., one text came through from a number I hadn't blocked yet, an old line my mother used to call me from when she wanted to feel casual. It was one word. Why? I didn't answer. At 7:11 p.m., the knock came. I live in a building with a locked entrance, but someone must have held the door open, or they waited until someone walked out. I opened my apartment door and saw all three of them, my brother, my mother, and his girlfriend standing in the hallway like a tribunal. His girlfriend looked more embarrassed than angry, like she hadn't signed up for family warfare and didn't know where to put her eyes. My brother stood with his hands in his pockets, jaw tight, trying to look like the victim. My mother stepped forward like she owned the air. She didn't say hello. She walked inside. "Why would you do that?" she demanded, turning to face me, like I was an employee she was about to discipline. I let the question sit for a moment, not because I didn't have answers, but because I wanted her to feel what it was like to speak into a room and not instantly control it. Then I asked, calmly, "Why did you tell everyone it was your gift?" My mother's expression didn't change, but her eyes sharpened. "It was a family gift," she said, like that phrase could erase the receipt, the account history, the months I'd spent planning. "No," I said, "it was mine." My brother shifted, finally speaking. "Debbie, it was supposed to be my birthday gift," he said, voice strained, as if that was the only part that mattered, that his disappointment was the center of the story. "It was," I replied, meeting his eyes. "From me." His girlfriend looked at him, not me, and that tiny movement said everything. She was trying to figure out what she'd walked into, what kind of family this was, and what it meant about the man beside her. My mother crossed her arms. "You humiliated us," she said. "Do you know what you did at that airport? People were watching. Your brother looked like an idiot." I almost laughed at the irony. They'd applauded while my mother humiliated me at dinner, but now humiliation mattered because it touched them. "You humiliated me first," I said. "You erased me, took credit, and then told everyone I was only invited because you felt sorry for me." My mother's eyes flicked, not guilt, calculation. I could have yelled then. I could have listed every time I'd saved them, every quiet bill I'd paid, every sacrifice they'd treated like background noise. But I didn't. I did something worse, something my mother hates more than anger. I told the truth. I looked at my brother and said, "You want to know the truth?" He hesitated, then nodded. "I'm not rich," I said. "I'm not doing that well. I don't have a fancy job. I don't have investments. I'm a driver. I drive this guy around, a blogger who likes to pretend he's a celebrity. That bonus wasn't a promotion reward. It was a one-time tip, a lucky break, and I spent it on you." The room changed instantly. The air shifted. My brother's mouth opened, then closed. His girlfriend's face tightened, and again, she looked at him like she was suddenly seeing how much of his life depended on someone else's generosity. My mother blinked slowly, as if she was trying to decide whether to deny it or weaponize it. "You lied," my mother said finally, but her voice wasn't outraged. It was almost satisfied, like she'd found a new angle. "No," I said. "You assumed. And you didn't correct it because you didn't like what the real story would make you look like." She didn't argue that. That was the most telling part. She simply held her chin higher and said, "I didn't want your brother to know his sister was struggling. He wouldn't respect you." There it was. The real poison. Not concern, control. She'd protected a narrative because it benefited her, not because it protected me. She'd rather let everyone think she was generous than let anyone think I was human. My brother finally found his voice. "So you canceled it because Mom didn't say your name?" he asked, trying to frame it as petty. "No," I said. "I canceled it because she humiliated me, and you let her. Because you were happy to take the applause. Because this family only remembers I exist when my money is involved." His girlfriend swallowed and murmured, "Maybe we should go," barely audible, like she was trying to escape before she became collateral damage. My mother stared at me for a long moment, then did what she always does when she can't win the argument. She turned it into a moral judgment. "You're cold," she said. "You're selfish. You don't know what family means." I stepped back slightly, keeping my voice level. "I know exactly what family means in this house. It means I give, and you take, and then you act like I should be grateful you let me sit at the table. My brother looked at me, something shifting behind his anger. Not remorse, not understanding. Something smaller, uncertainty, like he wasn't used to the floor moving under him. They left soon after. My mother didn't say goodbye. My brother gave me a look that felt like guilt wearing the mask of pity. His girlfriend mumbled something polite as she followed him out, and I watched them disappear down the hallway like a scene ending without closure. But closure wasn't the point. The next day, everything shifted, and not in the way I expected, because my parents came back, without my brother. And they brought food. Like peace could be packaged in a casserole dish. They showed up the next afternoon carrying food like it was a peace offering. My mother held the casserole dish out in front of her like a shield, my father hovering behind her with a paper bag of bread rolls, both of them wearing the same careful expressions they used whenever they wanted something from me without saying it outright. I let them in because I wanted to see what version of reality they were selling today. The door closed behind them, and just like that, the tone shifted. My father sat down and started chatting like nothing had happened, talking about the weather, about a neighbor's new car, about a TV show he thought I'd like. My mother set the food on the counter and sighed dramatically, shaking her head the way she does when she's about to complain but wants sympathy first. Then she started talking about my brother, about how irresponsible he'd been, about how ungrateful, about how he didn't appreciate what they'd done for him, how he'd changed, how disappointed they were. It was surreal watching the narrative flip so quickly. One week, he was the golden child receiving applause. The next, he was the problem they needed help managing. "You've always been the reliable one," my mother said, touching my arm like she was bestowing a title. "The adult. We know we can count on you." I recognized the trap immediately. This was the pivot. They weren't here to apologize. They were here to recruit me as the new favorite, the new fixer, the one who would absorb the fallout now that my brother wasn't performing the role they needed him to play. And right on cue, my mother asked if I could help them cover some expenses next month, just until things settled, just to get them through a rough patch. I said no. Not loudly, not angrily, just no. The word landed between us like a dropped plate. My mother blinked. My father frowned as if he'd misheard me. I repeated it calmly and added that I wasn't going to discuss it. I didn't explain. I didn't justify. I didn't soften it. I just said no again and changed the subject. They didn't push right away. I think they believed it was temporary, that I was still punishing them and would fold if they stayed sweet long enough. That belief lasted exactly 2 days. Then the calls started. Not from them at first, but from other people. An aunt asking if everything was okay between me and my brother. A cousin hinting that my parents were worried about me. Someone from my mother's church asking if I'd been under a lot of stress lately. Each conversation carried the same undertone, concern laced with judgment, curiosity disguised as care. And every time I could hear my mother's voice behind it, nudging the story just enough to make me look unstable without saying it outright. The real blow came at work. My manager called me into her office and closed the door, which she almost never does. She turned her screen toward me, and there it was, an email from a generic address claiming I'd been displaying erratic behavior in public, that I'd stormed out of a family event in a rage, and that for everyone's safety, my workplace might want to be cautious. It was written like concern, but it read like an accusation carefully wrapped in plausible deniability. The phrasing was too familiar. The subtle digs, the way it planted doubt without proof. It was my mother's voice, dressed up as professionalism. I explained the situation briefly, told my manager it was a family issue, and that the email wasn't grounded in reality. She listened, nodded, and said she believed me, but warned me about perception. I walked out of her office with my hands shaking, not from fear, but from a clean, focused anger. My mother had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. This wasn't about family dynamics anymore. This was about my livelihood. That night, I blocked everyone. My mother, my father, my brother, his girlfriend, the aunts and cousins who decided I was wrong without asking why. I deleted the family group chats, changed my number, locked down my social media, and started documenting everything. Emails, texts, dates, times, screenshots. I spoke to a lawyer who told me to keep records and be ready. It wasn't enough for a restraining order yet, but it was enough to prepare. For a few days there was silence, and I knew better than to trust it. The silence didn't last long enough for me to relax into it. About a week after I blocked everyone, my phone lit up with a number I hadn't blocked yet. My brother. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. Part of me wanted to ignore it, let him sit in the mess our parents had created, but another part of me, the part that remembered late nights and shared bedrooms and childhood secrets, answered. He didn't start with anger. He started with exhaustion. "Can we meet?" he asked quietly. "Just lunch. I need to talk." We met at a small diner downtown, the kind of place with chipped mugs and vinyl booths that smelled like coffee no matter what time of day it was. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Not just tired, but pressed down like something heavy had been sitting on his chest for months. He didn't touch his food. "I need to ask you something," he said. "Did you tell them about the money?" I blinked. "What money?" "The loan. 6 months earlier, he'd borrowed a large sum from our parents. He said it was for a business opportunity, a freelance project with big potential. No contract, no timeline, just trust and optimism, the two things my parents handed out freely, when they believed they were investing in the right child. The project fell through. He couldn't pay it back. And now, after the Tokyo disaster and the shift in family alliances, they'd turned on him. Daily calls, accusations, threats. They were telling relatives he was irresponsible, dishonest, that he'd stolen from them. "And they keep saying you exposed me," he added, shame creeping into his voice, "that you told them I was a failure." "I didn't," I said immediately. "They're lying." He nodded slowly, like he already knew that, but needed to hear it anyway. Then he said the sentence that reframed everything. "They're broke." I stared at him. Not struggling, not tight, broke. Credit cards maxed out, home equity drained, my dad's pension barely holding on. That loan to him hadn't come from savings. It came from a line of credit they were already drowning in. They hadn't been supporting him. They'd been gambling. And when it didn't pay off, they needed someone else to blame. All those years of judgment, all those comments about my job, my choices, my lack of ambition, all that superiority, and they'd been underwater the whole time. "They were hoping you'd make something of it," he said quietly, "hoping you'd bail them out again." That's when I understood why my mother had escalated so fast. Why she'd smeared me. Why she'd tried to replace my brother with me as the favorite fixer. This wasn't about pride. It was about survival. And I was the last rope they had left to grab. A few days later, the truth came out in pieces. A foreclosure notice, missed property taxes, second mortgage payments behind. The house I'd grown up in wasn't just unstable, it was already on fire. My brother and I sat across from each other again, this time in his apartment, papers spread across the table like evidence from a crime scene. We had a choice: walk away completely and let everything collapse, or step in just enough to stop the damage from splashing onto us. We chose the middle. We met with a financial advisor. We had a lawyer draft a 6-month agreement. We would cover the arrears to stop the foreclosure under strict conditions. Transparency, no secrets, no drama. If they violated the terms, the house would be sold. No negotiations. The conversation where we presented it was one I'll never forget. We sat at their kitchen table. My brother did most of the talking. I watched my parents' faces. My dad stared at the papers, like they were written in another language. My mother laughed, not because it was funny, but because she couldn't believe we were serious. "This is how you treat your own parents?" she asked. "No," I said calmly. "This is how we treat people who lied to us and expected us to clean it up quietly." She looked at me with something like hatred. "You're not family anymore." "I figured that out at your dinner," I replied. They signed 3 days later. It didn't fix anything. It just delayed the collapse. And when the details leaked, the story flipped again. Suddenly, my parents were victims being held hostage by their children. Relatives chose sides. Some blamed us. Some stayed silent. Most disappeared. Then came the hospital call. My mother had fallen in the kitchen. Concussion. Fractured wrist. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to pull us back into the orbit one last time. We visited. The room was quiet, tense, hollow. No apologies, no reckoning, just exhaustion. When we left, my dad admitted what he never had before. "She's not well," he said. "It's been building." It was the first honest thing he'd said to me in years. It didn't change anything. They missed another tax payment the following week. That's when the extended family split completely. Some accused us of cruelty. Others stopped calling altogether. Invitations dried up. Holidays went quiet. The family wasn't fractured anymore. It was gone. Once the truth about the house surfaced, everything unraveled faster than I expected, like a thread pulled from an old sweater that finally gives way. The foreclosure notice didn't stay quiet for long. Someone talked, someone always does, and suddenly the story my parents had worked so hard to control slipped out of their hands. Not the version where they were generous, wronged parents betrayed by ungrateful children, but the real one, where they had been living on borrowed money, borrowed time, and borrowed dignity. Relatives stopped calling to lecture. Some stopped calling altogether. A few sent stiff messages asking if the rumors were true, if my parents were really losing the house, if things were that bad. I didn't confirm or deny anything. I was done managing perception for people who had never managed truth. My brother and I stayed quiet, watching the noise burn itself out. The house went on the market in early spring, not with a sign in the yard or a proud announcement, but quietly, listed through a friend of a friend, priced below market to make sure it moved quickly. I found out the way I found out everything else by accident. A realtor I went to high school with recognized my last name and mentioned it casually, like it wasn't the place where every version of our family story had been staged for decades. He said my parents looked tired when he met them. Not angry, not dramatic, just tired. They sold it within a month. They moved into a small duplex 2 towns over, somewhere anonymous enough that no one would stop by uninvited. My mother deactivated her social media. My father stopped going to church. The applause dried up when there was nothing left to perform with. The people who had once praised them for raising such successful kids faded away when there was no success left to borrow. The strangest part was how quiet it all became. No final confrontation, no tearful apologies, no last attempt to pull me back in. It was like the story had simply run out of fuel. I didn't hear from my parents again. Not directly. Every now and then, someone would mention seeing them at the grocery store or at a pharmacy, always in passing, always followed by the same phrase. They asked about you. That was it. No call, no letter, just a breadcrumb that led nowhere. My brother did better once the chaos settled, not overnight and not dramatically, but steadily. He started freelancing again, real work this time, with contracts and deadlines and consequences. We talked once or twice a week, not like best friends, but like 2 people who survived the same storm and didn't need to keep proving it to each other. We didn't rehash the past. We didn't assign blame. We just let the distance be what it was, honest and manageable. As for me, life became quieter in ways I hadn't realized I was craving. I kept my job. Nothing else came of the email my mother had sent, and with documentation in place, the threat lost its teeth. I saved more. I spent less. I stopped explaining myself. Peace, I learned, doesn't announce itself. It just shows up one morning when you realize your phone hasn't made your stomach drop in days. Ethan noticed it before I did. One night, while we were cooking dinner, he said, "You don't flinch anymore." I laughed at first, then realized he was right. I wasn't bracing for the next demand, the next accusation, the next crisis that somehow required my wallet and my silence. I had space, real space, and once I felt it, I knew I couldn't give it up again. A year passed without ceremony. No holidays together, no forced reunions, no dramatic closure. My parents didn't call on my birthday. I didn't send a card. The absence stopped feeling like a wound and started feeling like a boundary that finally held. The anger faded, not because I forgave them, but because it got tired. Anger needs fuel. When you stop feeding it, it burns itself out. Sometimes people ask if I regret canceling that trip, if I wish I'd handled it differently, if I think things could have been salvaged. I always give the same answer. That dinner didn't break my family. It revealed it. The tickets were never really about Japan. They were about credit, control, who got to be seen as generous, and who was expected to be grateful for scraps. I didn't walk away because I was cruel. I walked away because I finally understood that staying meant disappearing. Some stories don't end with reconciliation or revenge. Some end with distance, with quiet, with the slow rebuilding of a life that doesn't revolve around fixing people who don't want to be honest. And sometimes that's the only ending that actually feels like freedom.